Hi, my name is Pedro Barata, and I'm a specialist in carbon markets. That's what I'm here to talk to you about. So what is a carbon market? Let's imagine you live in a city that is plagued by car pollution and climate change pollution. And your city government hires an economist, somebody like myself, to try to address this problem. And smart economists may come up with an answer like this to your city government. Let's have a system where every citizen in the city is given 5 tokens. Each token gives him or her the ability to drive in the city. The more you drive, the more tokens you use. Now imagine that you are a bike rider in that city. If you're a bike rider, you're given 5 tokens, but you don't use them. So you could sell those tokens to somebody else. Perhaps a commuter, somebody that actually has every day to come in and out of the city and has to do that for a living. Remember now that in the system that me as an economist would propose, all of the tokens are capped. They're limited. There's a limit to how much you can use in the city. In essence, what I've just told you is what is a compliance carbon market. This is a regulated market, usually by law, that allows companies or individuals to trade between themselves rights to carbon. Now, carbon markets are a very interesting instrument, and they come in different ways. As I told you, this is a compliance market. An additional type of market would be a voluntary carbon market. This is where companies, for example, take on commitments to reduce emissions. And in order to signal that they're meeting those commitments, they can buy carbon credits from other companies. Carbon credits that are generated by projects that reduce emissions. So with that, a company could say, for example, that they are on the way to carbon neutrality. That is what we call a voluntary carbon market. Now, these seem at first phase very simple and cogent ideas, but carbon markets have been very, very controversial, extremely controversial. I'm here to tell you about ways that we can improve these carbon markets and to essentially bust 3 myths that are out there around carbon markets. My name is Pedro Barata, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Carbon Pricing at Environmental Defense Fund. That's a global environmental NGO. My work for the last 15 years, or actually 25 years, has been to assist governments, international organizations in developing these types of carbon markets and finding solutions to address a lot of the issues and the problems, and there have been many, that plague carbon markets. But after all of these years, I am still convinced that carbon markets are an essential part of the response that we need to climate change. So as I said, let's start busting 3 myths. The first one comes from a very poorly understood word, offsetting. This is the idea that in the voluntary carbon market, companies can get away with just simply buying carbon credits, claiming that they have done something for the climate, and in fact, they are not doing much, really, especially if they are buying very cheap and low-quality carbon credits. Well, let's put that myth into perspective. First of all, is this about the carbon market? In reality, the compliance carbon market that I told you, the different varieties of carbon markets in the world, have a traded volume last year of nearly $900 billion. The voluntary carbon market, which is run on individual commitments from companies, is $2 billion. So really, this is not about the entirety of the carbon market. It's about a tiny part of that, which is a voluntary carbon market. But even there, is this myth true? Is there something to it? Well, there is, because there are some companies that will go on public and say that they're doing great stuff for the climate, but in reality, they're just buying the poorest type of carbon credit that there is. But the vast majority of companies right now, and we have data that shows that, the vast majority of companies that are purchasing carbon credits do so because prior to that, they have aligned their emission reductions with science-based trajectories. As part of a new initiative called the Science-Based Targets Initiative, companies, in particular larger ones, can commit to reducing emissions along a pathway to net zero. And those companies are held into account if they deviate from that. And guess what? Those are the companies that are also, as they are reducing their emissions internally, they're finding out about carbon credits and they're buying carbon credits elsewhere. So that's the first myth that we're busted. The second myth is that carbon credits and carbon crediting projects are small in nature, that they don't really drive anything transformational. So we really shouldn't bother very much about that. Well, again, let's look at the reality. Yes, there are many small projects, small enough that they don't make a dent. Sometimes they don't even register in what is climate change. But there are also now new approaches that carbon market geeks like myself are doing to scale up climate action. So for instance, as part of a new initiative driving carbon credits into tropical forests, we have managed to secure an alliance of global companies and governments, including several European governments and state governments in Brazil and other Latin American countries, an alliance that has $1.5 billion going into what we call jurisdictional approaches to deforestation. So when you have $1.5 billion to spend on initiatives that from the ground up will be ensuring that we're addressing the drivers of deforestation, that is transformational and that is scale. So that's the second myth. Now the third myth. And the third myth is that this whole carbon market is a Wild West, that people are out there to essentially foil or fool the innocent companies, or more importantly, the indigenous peoples out of their lands, out of their carbon rights, sometimes getting them into shady deals. Let's address this head on. It exists. It is bad. In many cases, it is a legal violation, and even in some cases, a human rights violation. That's not what the carbon market is about. But those incidents, and there have been many, we need to take care of those. How are we going to address them? We have two solutions for that. The first solution is we look at how we can develop at global scale guidance for carbon crediting projects that allows them to integrate not only the climate benefit, but social and environmental benefits. So that when somebody buys a credit that is addressing deforestation, preserving a forest in the back of the Amazon, it knows that it is also addressing the social drivers, perhaps by making money available to the communities for spending on education, for spending on health. I'm involved in a global initiative called the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, and that is one of the key issues that we are addressing. And we are coming out with guidance this year. The second solution that I'm here to tell you about is that more and more, we need to have indigenous peoples and local communities, not as the victims of carbon credit cowboys, but as communities and peoples engaged in actual carbon credits. At the very last Conference of the Parties, this large annual meeting of negotiators in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, I was part of an organization that hosted a lunch with community leaders from the Amazon, from the Congo Basin. And it was very interesting what they were telling us. They were telling us that in the past, yes, their communities had been victims of carbon credit fraudsters. But now what they wanted to ask is, how do we get the knowledge to get us through to actually be the ones driving the carbon credit market in our communities, so that we are the ones selling, not some middlemen from the north? So there you have it. 3 myths, 3 solutions. In fact, 4 solutions, because there are 2 solutions to that last myth. So let me stop there. Recap. We have now the ability to solve for the integrity issues of the carbon market. We have 25 years of experience. So it's upon us, everybody, to really focus on what can be improved. We know that we can have carbon markets that have high integrity, that can drive transformation at scale, and that can empower local communities and indigenous peoples in the making of carbon credits. Now imagine, picture yourself in the border of the Amazon rainforest, right by a rangeland where cows are feeding. That picture that I'm conjuring you, that picture is a picture of a conflict, a local conflict of resources between the small plot holder, the cattle rancher, and the indigenous people that is living in the forest. That conflict need not be solved in any violent way. In the state of Mato Grosso, the state took it upon himself to gather all of the communities of all of these stakeholders and put together a plan of action based on this jurisdictional approach that actually would empower the forest people as well as the small plot holders. And lo and behold, what happened? We had 90%, that's 90% less deforestation in the state of Mato Grosso. And we had triple the production of soy and of corn. So these things can be made compatible. Finally, the decade we're in until 2030 is a crucial decade to address climate change. In this decade, we need to make massive global emission reductions. One way of getting us there is through the use of carbon markets. But these have to be, again, high integrity, driven by scale, and with full empowerment of indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you very much.